Robert Reich, Professor Robert Reich, is a smart man. And in his latest book, Coming Up Short, he explains in this first chapter what he's experienced. Now he's, I think in 78, he's the same age as Donald J. Trump. And so he's seen a lot, and he's been in government service. So I think it's appropriate to share with you what he's experienced since he got involved in politics and other activities. And Inequality for All is a DVD I recommend that he came out with, and it started back way back when, and I forget, he notices things. He's an economics professor. He just retired from his post at a university. So I'm going to share this with you because I read this on my Kindle, his Coming Up Short, and it's enough to make you really think, because I also experienced what he's talking about here over my 81 years. Coming Up Short. This is the first chapter, a memoir of My America by Professor Robert B. Reich. For no part of life, neither public affairs nor private, neither in the forum, not at home, neither when acting on our own, nor in dealings with another, can be free from duty. Everything that is honorable in a life depends on its cultivation, and everything dishonorable upon its neglect. Cicero, 44 BC. Potter, have you put any real pressure on those people of yours to pay those mortgages? Bailey, times are bad, Mr. Potter. A lot of these people are out of work. Potter, then foreclose. Are you running a business or a charity ward? That was from the movie It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. I give to everybody. When they call, I give. And you know what? When I need something from them 2 years later, 3 years later, I call them. They are there for me. Donald J. Trump, 2016. Introduction. I was born on June 24th, 1946, 4 days after the birth of Donald J. Trump, 12 days before the birth of George Walker Bush, and 56 days before the birth of William Jefferson Blythe III, whose name was later changed to Bill Clinton. I did not become president, but among my earliest memoirs is my grandmother Minnie Reich telling me that I would become president. I think she was trying to reassure me that despite my being a runt, fully a head shorter than other little boys, I'd make her proud. When Trump first ran as a candidate for president in 2015, I viewed him as an anomaly, a cartoon character of a con man trying to gain political power. He spent most of his life bullying other employees, contractors, vendors, women, tenants, lawyers, bankers, politicians, producers. He was and is a bully's bully, vulgar, chaotic, angry, uninformed, impulsive, vindictive. I have seen the harm bullies cause, and I have spent much of my life trying to stop them. I fought schoolyard toughs who teased and harassed me for being short. I was protected by a teenager who subsequently was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan for trying to register black voters in Mississippi. I marched for civil rights, protested the Vietnam War, and worked to elect Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy, the anti-war candidate for president in 1968. I interned for Bobby Kennedy argued 2 Supreme Court cases, and advised at the Federal Trade Commission. As Labor Secretary to Bill Clinton, I tried to protect workers who were bullied by employers. When I ran for governor of Massachusetts, I became the first candidate for mayor's office in America to endorse gay marriage. I taught several generations of students at Harvard, Brandeis, and Berkeley, and wrote a bunch of books. I always believed America was not a nation of bullies. We protected the vulnerable, comforted the afflicted, gave refuge to those fleeing violence and persecution, and gave voice to those who otherwise would not be heard. I found these ideals in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, Emma Lazara's poem affixed to the Statue of Liberty, FDR's second inaugural address, and Martin Luther King, its Free at Last sermon at the 1963 March on Washington. My parents and grandparents espoused these ideals, and my teachers expounded them, connecting me with previous generations of Americans and the sacrifices they endured to preserve our democracy and achieve a greater good. We did not always live up to these ideals, of course, but through most of my life, they continue to guide the nation. I cherish these ideals and hope to pass them on. When I was Secretary of Labor, I had an office near the U.S. Capitol, from which I had a close-up view of the Capitol building's large, majestic dome. When I worked late, which was most nights, I'd look up from my desk and see its hulking beauty lit up like a great monument to the idea of American democracy. I was often exhausted, sometimes discouraged, but the sight of that great dome filled me with the sense that I was taking part in something hugely important. It seemed to illuminate everything I was trying to do and vindicate the frustrations I felt trying, but often failing, to keep the economic bullies at bay. Yet Trump was elected president in 2016. And then after losing the election in 2020 and instigating a coup and an attack on the U.S. Capitol, on American democracy itself, he was reelected in 2024. And on January 2025, he took the oath of office for the second time right under the great dome of the Capitol. I asked myself how a plurality, albeit a razor-thin one, of American voters could possibly choose to put him in the Oval Office again and trust that he would abide by his oath when he betrayed it the first time. There are many explanations, but for me, the most convincing one began to unfold more than 4 decades ago when I noticed that most Americans' income were flattening, even though the economy continued to grow. And since then, the lion's share of economic gains have gone to the top. Most Americans, especially those without college degrees, have felt very little improvement in their lives, and their jobs have grown to less secure. Vast swaths of the country have been abandoned by industry. The basic bargain used to be that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you'd do better than your parents, and your children would do even better than you. But since the late 1970s, that bargain has become a sham. The middle class has shrunk. Some 50 millions have been siphoned from the bottom 90% of Americans to the richest 1%. Many Americans felt frustrated and angry. Trump gave voice to that anger, although he directed it at scapegoats who did nothing to cause it: undocumented workers, the deep state and transgender people, communists and Democrats. And he did nothing whatsoever to address the underlying cause, the corruption of American democracy by big money, intent on rigging the system to its advantage and against average working people. In fact, the majority A major legislative achievement of Trump's first term was a big tax cut to the wealthy. And as I write this, he is planning another, and he did it with a big, ugly bill. Through these years, I watched other Republican presidents also cut taxes on the wealthy, arguing that the government should allow the so-called free market to operate without constraint, perpetuating the trickle-down myth that great wealth in the hands of a few will benefit the many as the rich make the nation more productive. But as I came to understand, the free market is a misnomer, and little or nothing has trickled down. Meanwhile, I watched Democrats abandon working class. John F. Kennedy was the last Democratic president to depend on the votes of working class Americans while losing the votes of white, college-educated Americans by 2-1. 60 years later, Joe Biden depended on the votes of college-educated Americans while losing the votes of the white working class by 2-1. Kamala Harris lost the working class by even a larger margin. I saw Democratic leaders embrace free trade and lower tariffs on Chinese goods. I witnessed them deregulate finance and allow Wall Street to become a high-stakes gambling casino. I was there when they let big corporations gain enough market power to keep prices and profit margins high. I saw them look away when corporations busted unions and slashed payrolls. I had a front row seat when they bailed out Wall Street because its gambling addiction threatened to blow up the entire economy, but never bailed out homeowners who lost everything. I saw them welcome big money into their campaigns and deliver quid pro quos that rigged the market in favor of big corporations and the wealthy. To his credit, Joe Biden redirected the Democratic Party back toward its working class roots. But many of the changes Biden catalysts wouldn't be evident for years and would easily be reversed. And he had great difficulty communicating effectively about them. In her brief right campaign, Kamala Harris rarely mentioned inequality. She said she'd end corporate price gouging, but never explained what it was or how she'd stop it. Her campaign had enormous energy, but was on a perilously short runway, and she was not able to address why so many Americans were working harder and yet still struggling economically. Over the decades, I have participated in some of the nation's failed responses to widening inequality. I have also spoken up against policies I feared would widen it further into presidents' ears. To any member of Congress who'd listen, and whenever I had the chance to the American public, I urged Democratic candidates and lawmakers to tell Americans why their pay continued to be lousy and their jobs less secure. Certainly not because of immigrants, the deep state, transgender people, communists, or any other boogeyman, but because of the power of large corporations and the rich to rig the market and siphon off most of the economics gains and the economy's gains. I asked Democrats to stop doing the bidding of big corporations and the wealthy and instead champion the working class. Demand paid family leave, Medicare for all, free public higher education, stronger unions, and higher taxes on great wealth, and create the biggest boom in residential home construction since World War II. I argued that corporations must share their profits with their workers and limit CEO pay, that stock buybacks should be illegal, that corporate welfare, subsidies, and tax credits unrelated to the common good be stopped and giant corporations busted up. I warned that widening inequality and the corruption that accompanied it would eventually invite a demagogue who'd exploit the powerlessness and rage of Americans who felt economically bullied. It's possible that the arguments I've made over the decades have been wrong, and my warnings alarmist, but they have been based on what I know, have seen, and experienced, and now that the nation has reelected exactly the kind of demagogue I pretended, I feel added urgency in explaining why it is so important to reverse the staggering inequalities and legalize bribery that characterizes today's America. That is the lesson of this book. It is in many respects the lesson of my life. I love America and am proud of much that this nation has accomplished over my lifetime. I remain doggedly hopeful about the long-term future, but undeniably, we and much of the world now face a brutal set of crises, headed by the decline of democracy and the deterioration of the rule of law. My father and his greatest generation won the Second World War and created the most powerful economy and strongest democracy the world has ever seen, populated by the largest and most prosperous middle class in history. My boomer generation and I then failed to create the decent, sustainable, and just society that was within our grasp in this regard. I'm sorry to say, we all came up short. Coming Up Short, a memoir of my America by Robert B. Reich.